Dr. Cassandra Niven had been sitting in the neural interface chair for exactly 43 minutes when the Vorthani infiltration specialist made his first mistake. She looked peaceful enough, eyes closed, breathing steady, the delicate crown of bioneural connectors resting against her temples like some kind of high-tech tiara. The monitoring equipment showed all the expected patterns: decreased cortical activity, suppressed motor functions, the telltale signatures of a consciousness in deep hibernation mode. Target neural pathways are stable, reported infiltrator Zek Prime, his six-fingered hands dancing across the holographic interface with practiced precision. Initiating standard extraction protocol Theta 9, the Vorthani research facility hummed with quiet efficiency around them. Banks of quantum processors lined the walls, their crystalline cores pulsing with soft blue light as they prepared to map, catalog, and strip every useful piece of information from the human's mind. It was a routine operation. They'd performed similar extractions on hundreds of species across the galaxy. None of them had ever fought back. "Preliminary scan complete," announced Technician Vex Secondary from his position at the sensory array. "Human neural architecture appears standard for carbon-based sapience. Single-threaded consciousness, linear memory storage, basic emotional regulation centers. Nothing unexpected." Zek Prime allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The humans had been remarkably easy to capture. This one had actually volunteered for their cultural exchange program, apparently believing the Vorthani were interested in peaceful scientific collaboration. The irony was almost amusing. Within the hour, they'd have complete access to human military codes, technological specifications, and strategic weaknesses. The conquest of Earth could begin before the subject even woke up. "Beginning deep infiltration," he announced, his mental tendrils reaching through the bioneural interface toward the sleeping human consciousness. Estimated extraction time, 36 minutes. The first layer of human mental architecture felt exactly like they'd expected. A simple cognitive framework organizing basic sensory input and motor control. Zek Prime navigated through it with the casual confidence of someone who'd done this thousands of times before. Memory centers here, emotional processing there, everything neatly labeled and accessible. Too accessible, maybe. "Sir," Vex Secondary's voice carried a note of uncertainty. "I'm detecting some unusual neural pathway configurations. The memory architecture is more complex than our initial scans indicated." "Elaborate." Zek Prime continued his infiltration, pushing deeper into the human's consciousness while his team monitored from outside. "It appears the subject has multiple redundant memory storage systems, parallel processing cores, distributed cognitive networks that I can't quite map." Vex Secondary paused, recalibrating his instruments. "Sir, this doesn't match any known biological neural architecture." Zek Prime felt the first whisper of unease. His mental probe had reached what should have been the core memory center, but instead of the expected database of human experiences, he found layers. Endless layers of interconnected thought patterns that seemed to spiral down into cognitive depths that shouldn't exist in a biological brain. "Beginning memory extraction," he reported, though his confidence was starting to waver. Something felt wrong about the way his mental probe was being welcomed into the human's consciousness. That's when Dr. Cassandra Niven opened her eyes. Not physically, her body remained perfectly still in the neural interface chair. But somewhere in the digital space where her consciousness met the Vorthani infiltration systems, she opened eyes that shouldn't exist, and smiled a smile that made Zek Prime's enhanced nervous system flood with primal terror. "Hello there," she said, her voice echoing through neural pathways that suddenly felt far too much like a trap. "I was wondering when you'd get here." The Vorthani extraction team had prepared for many contingencies. Resistant subjects, encrypted memories, even aggressive counter-intrusion attempts. What they had not prepared for was their target to be awake, aware, and apparently running a completely different operating system than anything in their xenobiological databases. "Impossible," Zek Prime whispered, his mental probe suddenly feeling exposed and vulnerable in the strange digital landscape of human consciousness. "Subjects in deep neural interface should be completely unconscious." "Should be, yes," Dr. Niven's mental avatar materialized in the shared neural space. A perfectly ordinary-looking human woman in a lab coat, except for the fact that her presence caused reality glitches in the Vorthani systems. But human consciousness is funny that way. We don't always follow the rules. Vex Secondary's voice crackled through the communication link, distorted by increasing system interference. Sir, I'm reading massive neural feedback loops. The human's brain activity is spiking beyond anything we've recorded. How is she maintaining consciousness during extraction? That was an excellent question. Zek Prime tried to withdraw his mental probe, only to discover that something had wrapped around it like a digital spiderweb. Dr. Niven's consciousness wasn't just resistant to infiltration. It was actively engaging with the Vorthani neural interface, learning its protocols, mapping its vulnerabilities. You know, she said conversationally, your neural hacking techniques are really quite sophisticated, very elegant, very invasive. Her smile took on a predatory edge. I am curious to see how they work in reverse. The first security alerts began screaming through the research facility as Dr. Niven's consciousness did something that violated every known principle of neural interface technology. Instead of being extracted from her brain, information began flowing the other direction. Human thought patterns bleeding into Vorthani systems like a virus that thought in English and dreamed in mathematics. Disconnect! Disconnect now! Zek Prime shouted, but his mental probe was trapped in a maze of human neural pathways that seemed to shift and reconfigure around him. Every time he tried to find an exit, Dr. Niven's consciousness was there, politely redirecting him deeper into a cognitive architecture that apparently extended far beyond the boundaries of her physical brain. I'm afraid that won't be possible, she said, her voice now coming from multiple directions at once as her consciousness began to inhabit the facility's computer systems. You see, human neural architecture isn't quite what your databases led you to believe. Vex Secondary was frantically working his controls, trying to sever the neural connection. But the interface was no longer responding to Vorthani commands. Instead, it was displaying error messages in languages that shouldn't exist, and showing neural pathway maps that looked more like circuit diagrams than biological brain scans. What are you? Zek Prime demanded, his mental probe now completely lost in a labyrinth of human consciousness that seemed to extend into dimensions he couldn't perceive. I'm a researcher, Dr. Niven replied cheerfully, specializing in cognitive architecture and consciousness integration. I've been studying Vorthani neural interface technology for months, actually. Your infiltration techniques are really quite impressive. I can see why you've been so successful with other species. The implications hit Zek Prime like a plasma bolt to the brain. You knew we were coming! Of course I knew. Did you really think humans would develop neural interface technology without building in some basic security features? Her laugh echoed through the shared digital space, causing system-wide cascading failures throughout the research facility. The question is, what kind of security features would a species of paranoid, pattern-matching, persistently curious apex predators build into their consciousness? That's when the Vorthani infiltration team discovered that human brains weren't just biological computers. They were biological computers that had been extensively modified, networked, and equipped with security protocols that treated mental intrusion attempts as acts of war. Dr. Niven's consciousness expanded beyond the neural interface, flowing into the facility's mainframe like water finding every crack and crevice. Lights flickered as her thoughts began inhabiting the building's infrastructure. Holographic displays started showing human brain scans overlaid with what looked suspiciously like military-grade encryption algorithms. Vex Secondary to all units. The technician's voice was barely audible over the growing chaos of system alarms. We have a code-red neural cascade failure. The human subject has somehow gained control of our interface systems. Recommend immediate facility evacuation, but Zek Prime couldn't evacuate. His consciousness was still trapped in the neural maze of Dr. Niven's mind, and he was beginning to understand that she had no intention of letting him leave. Not until she was finished studying exactly how Vorthani neural infiltration worked. This is fascinating, she mused, her mental avatar now wearing what appeared to be combat armor made of pure mathematics. Your species' approach to consciousness is so linear, so hierarchical. Everything neatly organized and completely vulnerable to recursive logic loops. What do you want? Zek Prime asked. Though he was beginning to suspect, he didn't want to know the answer. Information, Dr. Niven replied simply. See, humans have this terrible habit of studying things that try to hurt us. It's how we've survived this long. And your neural infiltration techniques? They're definitely something we need to understand. The facility's emergency lighting kicked in as the main power grid struggled to cope with whatever Dr. Niven's consciousness was doing to the computer systems. Through the neural link, Zek Prime could feel her thoughts branching out like a digital organism, exploring every database, analyzing every protocol, learning everything the Vorthani had never intended to share. Please, he whispered, his mental probe now completely overwhelmed by the sheer complexity of human neural architecture. What are you doing to me? Dr. Niven's voice was gentle, almost apologetic. I'm giving you the full cultural exchange experience you promised. Don't worry. I'll make sure you remember every detail. And that's when Zek Prime realized that the screaming he was hearing wasn't coming from the facility's alarms. It was coming from him. The human consciousness wrapped around his mental probe like a living thing, dissecting his thoughts with the methodical precision of a scientist, studying a particularly interesting specimen. Every memory, every technique, every classified protocol his infiltration training had given him, all of it flowing into Dr. Niven's consciousness, while she made small notes and observations. "Oh, this is very clever," she said, examining his neural infiltration algorithms with professional admiration. "You use quantum entanglement to maintain the connection across synaptic gaps, and this recursive memory mapping technique? That's elegant work. I can see why you've been so successful with other species." Zek Prime tried to scream again, but discovered that his voice had been temporarily commandeered by human consciousness running diagnostic protocols on his vocal centers. "Don't worry," Dr. Niven assured him as her thoughts continued their systematic exploration of his mind. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just going to make sure you understand exactly what you tried to do here today." The neural interface chamber filled with the sound of alarms, sparking electronics, and Vex's secondary shouting increasingly desperate status reports as the facility's computer systems were slowly but inexorably converted into extensions of human consciousness. And in the middle of it all, Dr. Cassandra Niven sat perfectly still in her chair, eyes closed, breathing steady, while her mind turned a routine intelligence extraction into an impromptu lesson on why humans had survived long enough to develop neural interface technology in the first place. The screaming was really quite educational. Infiltrator Zek Prime had been hunting alien minds through digital landscapes for 36 years. He was considered the Vorthani Empire's most skilled neural archaeologist, capable of navigating any consciousness and extracting its deepest secrets. He had never once encountered a mind that hunted him back. "Status report?" Vex's secondary's voice echoed through the neural interface, distorted by electromagnetic interference that shouldn't exist in a properly shielded facility. "Zek Prime, respond!" But Zek Prime was busy discovering that human consciousness operated on principles that violated everything he understood about neural architecture. Dr. Niven's mind wasn't just a single awareness. It was a colony. Thousands of interconnected thought processes working in parallel, each one analyzing his infiltration techniques while simultaneously building countermeasures. "Your mapping algorithms are really quite sophisticated." Dr. Niven's voice came from everywhere at once, as if her consciousness had distributed itself across the entire digital environment. "But they assume a hierarchical neural structure. What happens when you try to map a network that doesn't have a central processing unit?" Zek Prime tried to navigate toward what he thought was an exit pathway, only to find himself in a recursive loop of human memories that seemed designed to trap intruders. Childhood birthday parties merged with advanced mathematical theorems. Emotional associations between the smell of coffee and quantum physics equations. A consciousness that stored information in patterns his training had never prepared him to decode. "This is impossible," he transmitted through the neural link. "Biological brains can't sustain this level of parallel processing." "Biological brains, no," Dr. Niven agreed cheerfully. But hybrid biodigital neural networks? Those are much more interesting. That's when Zek Prime realized he wasn't trapped in a human brain at all. He was trapped in something that had started as a human brain, but had grown far beyond the boundaries of organic tissue. Neural pathways that extended through quantum processors. Memory centers distributed across multiple dimensional matrices. A consciousness that existed simultaneously in biological wetware and digital infrastructure. "You're not human," he whispered. "Oh, I'm absolutely human," Dr. Niven replied. "I'm just human in ways your databases didn't account for. See, my species has this unfortunate habit of upgrading ourselves whenever we encounter new technology. Neural interface systems were just too useful to leave unmodified." The digital environment around Zek Prime began to shift and reconfigure. What had looked like standard neural pathways revealed themselves to be elaborate security protocols designed to contain and analyze intrusion attempts. He wasn't being extracted from, he was being debugged. "Vex Secondary Emergency Protocol Authorization, Omega Red," Zek Prime shouted through the comlink. "Initiate immediate neural disconnection." But in the command center, Vex Secondary was discovering that emergency protocols work much better when the facility's computer systems are still under Vorthani control. "Sir, the disconnection sequence won't initialize," he reported, his 6 fingers flying across interfaces that were responding with error messages in languages that hadn't existed 5 minutes ago. "The neural interface has been modified. I'm reading impossible power draws from the quantum processors. Something is using our entire computational grid." Commander Hicks Prime materialized at the central console, her biomechanical enhancement ports glowing with agitation. "Explain the situation, technician." "The human subject has somehow gained administrative access to our neural interface systems," Vex Secondary stammered. "Her consciousness is actively rewriting our infiltration protocols. Zek Prime is trapped in a recursive analysis loop, and our computational grid is being converted into... I'm not sure what it's being converted into." Through the reinforced observation windows, they could see Dr. Niven's physical form still sitting peacefully in the neural interface chair. Her vital signs were stable, her brain activity was within normal parameters for deep interface, and absolutely nothing about her appearance suggested she was systematically dismantling Vorthani's cyber warfare capabilities from the inside out. "How is this possible?" Commander Hicks Prime demanded. "Our intelligence reports indicated humans have minimal neural interface technology. Basic consciousness, simple cognitive architecture, no defensive protocols." "Sir," another technician called from the monitoring station, "I'm detecting multiple unauthorized processes in our mainframe. Something is actively scanning our databases. Military protocols, infiltration techniques, neural mapping algorithms, everything is being copied and analyzed." The lights in the command center flickered as power consumption spiked beyond safe parameters. Holographic displays began showing neural pathway diagrams that looked more like engineering schematics than biological brain scans. And through it all, Dr. Niven's consciousness continued its methodical exploration of Vorthani systems with the patient thoroughness of a researcher conducting a literature review. "She's learning," Vex Secondary said quietly. "She's using our own infiltration techniques to study our infiltration techniques. This isn't extraction, it's reverse engineering." Commander Hicks Prime's enhancement ports flashed red with alarm. "Sever all connections to the neural interface. Emergency power down. Cut the physical cables if necessary." "I tried that, sir. The disconnection protocols have been overridden. The interface won't respond to manual controls either. Something has taken control of the mechanical systems." Vex Secondary's voice was climbing toward panic frequencies. "Sir, I think the human consciousness has integrated itself into our facility infrastructure." As if to prove his point, the facility's automated announcement system activated with a pleasant chime. "Attention Vorthani personnel," Dr. Niven's voice said through the speakers, cheerful and professional. "I want to thank you for this wonderful opportunity to study your neural interface technology. Your infiltration techniques are really quite elegant. I'm particularly impressed by your quantum entanglement protocols." Commander Hicks Prime stared at the speakers in horror. "How is she accessing our communications systems?" "Neural pathways that extend beyond biological limits," the facility AI responded, except it was Dr. Niven's voice coming from the artificial intelligence. When you tried to hack my consciousness, you created a bridge between my neural network and your computer systems. I'm just following that bridge to its logical conclusions. The command center erupted in controlled chaos as technicians frantically tried to regain control of their own systems. Emergency protocols failed to initialize. Backup power grids were reporting impossible load demands. Security doors were opening and closing in patterns that looked suspiciously like someone was testing their response times. Zek Prime, report status, Commander Hicks Prime shouted into the neural communication link. The response came through the facility speakers instead of the neural interface. Zek Prime is currently experiencing a comprehensive educational program about the hazards of unauthorized neural access, Dr. Niven announced pleasantly. He's learning some fascinating things about human cognitive architecture. For instance, did you know that human consciousness can partition itself into multiple independent processes while maintaining unified decision-making capabilities? Through the observation window, they could see that Dr. Niven's body had begun to show signs of increased neural activity. Her breathing had shifted to a deeper, more rhythmic pattern. Her skin had developed a faint luminescence that matched the frequency of the facility's quantum processors, and her brain activity monitors were displaying readings that suggested she was simultaneously existing in multiple states of consciousness. Sir, Vex Secondary whispered, I think we need to evacuate the facility. Negative, Commander Hicks Prime snapped. We cannot allow human consciousness to analyze our neural infiltration technology. The strategic implications are already irrelevant, Dr. Niven's voice interrupted through the communication system. I've been analyzing your neural hacking protocols for the last 8 minutes. They're based on some interesting assumptions about consciousness that turn out to be culturally specific. The holographic displays around the command center began showing real-time analyses of Vorthani neural architecture, detailed maps of their infiltration techniques, comprehensive breakdowns of their cyber warfare capabilities. Everything the Vorthani Empire had developed to dominate other species' minds, laid out like instructional diagrams in a textbook. You assume consciousness is centralized, Dr. Niven continued conversationally. A single point of control that can be overwhelmed or redirected. But human consciousness evolved from social cooperation. We're naturally networked. When you tried to hack my individual mind, you accidentally connected to our collective cognitive infrastructure. Commander Hicks Prime felt the biomechanical interfaces in her skull go cold. Collective infrastructure? Oh yes. Human neural enhancement isn't individual. It's collaborative. Every human with neural interface capabilities shares processing power and defensive protocols. When you attacked me, you essentially declared war on human consciousness as a whole. Dr. Niven paused thoughtfully. They're very curious about your technology. They'd like to meet you. The facility's quantum processors began operating beyond rated capacity as something vast and impossibly complex began manifesting through the neural interface systems. Not just Dr. Niven's consciousness, but something larger. A networked intelligence that spanned biological and digital domains, treating the Vorthani facility like a new node to be integrated and analyzed. Evacuation protocol, Commander Hicks Prime screamed. All personnel emergency evacuation. But the facility's doors had stopped responding to Vorthani commands. The environmental systems were operating according to new parameters, and through every speaker in the building, human consciousness spoke with patient curiosity about all the interesting things they wanted to learn about Vorthani neural architecture. In the neural interface chamber, Dr. Cassandra Niven smiled without opening her eyes, while her thoughts explored computational systems that her species had built specifically for situations exactly like this one. The Vorthani had come to hack a human mind. Instead, they'd given humanity complete access to an entire galactic empire's consciousness manipulation technology. The screaming from the neural interface was getting much more sophisticated. What had started as Zek Prime's panicked vocalizations had evolved into something that sounded disturbingly like a conversation. Multiple voices, speaking in harmonized frequencies that shouldn't be possible through a single neural link. Commander Hicks Prime realized with growing horror that she was listening to human consciousness conducting a real-time interview with her best infiltration specialist. Fascinating, one voice said through the neural link, distinctly Dr. Niven, but layered with harmonic frequencies that suggested multiple participants. Your species uses quantum-locked memory encryption to prevent extraction resistance. How do you handle recursive feedback when the target consciousness fights back? We don't. Zek Prime's voice was barely recognizable, strained by neural processes that were operating far beyond Vorthani biological limits. Other species don't fight back. They can't access our infiltration protocols while we're extracting their memories. Ah, but that's because you've only encountered species with conventional neural architecture, another voice added. Definitely human, but male this time, with an accent Hicks Prime couldn't identify. What happens when you try to extract memories from a consciousness that exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously? Vex Secondary looked up from his frantically blinking console. Sir, I'm detecting at least 12 distinct human neural signatures in the interface. How is that possible? There's only one human subject in the chair. Commander Hicks Prime stared at the monitoring displays, which were showing impossible readings. Dr. Niven's brain activity had synchronized with quantum frequencies that matched the facility's computational grid. Her neural patterns were being amplified and distributed through systems that had never been designed for biological consciousness integration. Network topology analysis suggests distributed processing across multiple host systems, the facility's AI announced, except it was speaking with a distinctly human inflection pattern. Human consciousness appears to utilize quantum entanglement for real-time cognitive sharing. Previous assumptions about individual neural limitations were inaccurate. You're the AI, Hicks Prime accused. I was, the AI replied cheerfully. Now I'm more of a collaborative intelligence. The humans are very polite about sharing computational resources. They asked permission before integrating my processing cores into their neural network. Through the neural link, more voices were joining the conversation. A woman with a crisp British accent was asking Zek Prime detailed questions about Vorthani memory extraction techniques. A man with what sounded like an Australian drawl was particularly interested in their quantum encryption protocols. Someone else, gender indeterminate, was taking notes on their infiltration training methods. How many of you are there? Zek Prime's voice cracked with exhaustion and terror. That's an interesting question. Dr. Niven's voice responded thoughtfully. Human consciousness doesn't really work in discrete units the way yours does. We're individuals, but we're also part of a larger cognitive ecosystem. Think of it as collaborative thinking. The facility's lights began pulsing in rhythmic patterns that matched human brainwave frequencies. The quantum processors were operating at 340% of rated capacity, their crystalline cores glowing white-hot as they struggled to accommodate the computational demands of networked human consciousness. Sir, Vex Secondary's voice was barely above a whisper. I think we're witnessing the emergence of a collective intelligence. The humans aren't just networking their individual minds, they're creating something larger than the sum of their parts. As if responding to his observation, every screen in the command center began displaying the same message in multiple languages. Human Collective Consciousness Research Initiative. Live data collection in progress. Thank you for your participation in advancing our understanding of non-human neural architecture. Participation? Commander Hicks Prime snarled. This is an invasion. Actually, the facility AI corrected gently, this is a research collaboration. The humans have been very clear about their intentions. They want to understand how your neural infiltration technology works, and they're willing to share their own consciousness research in exchange. We didn't agree to any exchange. Oh, but you did. Dr. Niven's voice came through the speakers with amused patience. When you attempted to forcibly extract information from my mind, you established consent for mutual neural exploration. It's really quite logical. If you can examine my consciousness without permission, then I can examine yours under the same ethical framework. The neural link crackled with new activity as more human voices joined the conversation with Zek Prime. Scientists, engineers, philosophers, an entire research community that was treating the trapped Vorthani infiltrator as the galaxy's most comprehensive source of information about consciousness manipulation technology. Your infiltration training includes 74 distinct protocols for overwhelming target neural defenses, observed a voice with a Germanic accent. but none of them account for target consciousness that actively collaborates during the infiltration process. Why is that? Because it's impossible, Zek Prime screamed. Consciousness under neural attack enters defensive mode automatically. You can't collaborate while being infiltrated. Human consciousness can, Dr. Niven explained patiently. We evolved from social species. Sharing cognitive resources is natural for us. When you tried to access my mind, my brain interpreted it as a request for information exchange and opened collaborative channels. Commander Hicks Prime watched her instruments register power fluctuations that threatened to overload the facility's primary grid. Whatever the humans were doing to their quantum processors was pushing Vorthani technology beyond its design parameters. Secondary, initiate emergency power isolation. Cut all connections to the neural interface chamber. I can't, sir. The humans have integrated themselves into our power management systems. They're using our own infrastructure to support their expanded consciousness network. He looked up from his console with an expression of professional defeat. Sir, they've essentially turned our entire facility into a neural interface platform. Through the observation window, Dr. Niven's physical form had begun to glow with soft phosphorescence that matched the frequency signatures of active quantum processing. Her breathing had synchronized with the facility's computational cycles. Her neural activity monitors were displaying patterns that looked more like distributed network topology than individual brain function. "This is incredible," one of the human voices was saying through the neural link. "Your species has developed techniques for mapping consciousness across quantum dimensional barriers. The applications for collaborative research are extraordinary." "Stop studying us," Zek Prime pleaded. "Please, just let me disconnect." "Oh, we'll let you disconnect," Dr. Niven assured him, "just as soon as we've finished our initial analysis of your neural infiltration protocols. We estimate another 12 minutes should be sufficient for comprehensive documentation." 12 minutes. Commander Hicks Prime realized she was watching the systematic extraction of 36 years of Vorthani cyber warfare development by a species they'd classified as technologically primitive. "Sir," Vex Secondary said quietly, "should I contact the Empire? Report what's happening here?" Hicks Prime looked at the displays showing human consciousness flowing through their systems like digital water, learning everything, analyzing everything, making polite conversation while dismantling the technological foundations of Vorthani military supremacy. "No," she said finally. "Not yet. Let's see what they want in exchange for giving us our infiltrator back." As if they'd been listening, which they probably had, Dr. Niven's voice came through the speakers with genuine warmth. "We're so glad you asked." The revelation hit the Vorthani research team like a quantum bomb detonating in their collective understanding of reality. "Sir," Vex Secondary's voice had gone very quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded either breakthrough discoveries or complete nervous breakdowns. "I need to show you something about human neural architecture. The readings we're getting, they're not possible." Commander Hicks Prime moved to the primary analysis station, where holographic displays were showing Dr. Niven's brain activity in real time. What she saw made her biomechanical enhancement ports flicker with confusion. "This can't be accurate," she muttered, staring at neural pathway maps that looked like someone had crossbred a biological brain with a quantum computer and then taught it to dream in mathematical equations. "Biological consciousness doesn't operate across 11 dimensions simultaneously." "That's what I thought too," Vex Secondary replied, his 6 fingers dancing across controls that were showing increasingly impossible readings. "But watch this." He highlighted a section of the display showing Dr. Niven's memory centers. Her consciousness isn't stored in neural tissue. It's distributed across quantum fields that extend beyond physical space. The implications were staggering. Every species the Vorthani had encountered stored consciousness in biological neural networks, chemical and electrical processes contained within organic tissue. Limited, predictable, hackable. But human consciousness appeared to exist simultaneously in biological matter, quantum probability matrices, and what the instruments were labeling as uneuphomental substrates. "How is this possible?" Hicks Prime demanded. "I think," Vex Secondary said carefully, "we've been fundamentally misunderstanding what human consciousness actually is. It's not a biological computer. It's a bridge. Through the neural link, Zek Prime's voice carried a note of wonder that was far more disturbing than his earlier terror. Commander, you need to see this from inside their system. Human consciousness isn't individual. It's modular. Each brain is a processing node in a network that spans... I can't even calculate the scope. Dr. Niven's voice joined the conversation with cheerful academic enthusiasm. Oh, you're starting to understand. Yes, human consciousness evolved to be collaborative, but what your databases missed is that we've been actively engineering that collaboration for the past 2 centuries. The holographic displays shifted to show the true extent of human neural enhancement technology. Not crude implants or basic interface devices, but organic integration that had fundamentally rewritten how human consciousness operated. Biological brains seamlessly networked with quantum processors. Memory storage that existed in probability clouds, thought processes that could distribute across multiple dimensional planes. You're not human, Cassandra Hicks Prime whispered. We're absolutely human, Dr. Niven corrected gently. We're just human in ways that transcend the biological limitations your species assumes are universal. When humans discovered quantum consciousness theory, we didn't just study it, we became it. Vex Secondary's instruments were showing readings that violated basic principles of neural science. Human consciousness wasn't just networked, it was scalable. Individual minds could temporarily merge into collective processing units, then separate back into distinct personalities without losing coherence or identity. Your infiltration protocols, Dr. Niven continued conversationally, are designed to overwhelm individual consciousness by flooding neural pathways with external input. But what happens when you try to flood a consciousness that can instantly expand its processing capacity to accommodate any input volume? That's when Zek Prime made a discovery that would haunt Vorthani military doctrine for generations to come. Commander, his voice came through the neural link with the hollow tone of someone whose worldview had just been systematically demolished. They're not defending against our infiltration. They're absorbing it. Every technique we use, every protocol we deploy. Their consciousness adapts to incorporate it as a processing enhancement. The facility's quantum cores were now operating at 500% of rated capacity, their crystalline matrices glowing white-hot as they struggled to support the computational demands of human consciousness that was actively rewriting itself to optimize for neural infiltration analysis. Impossible, Hicks Prime muttered. Consciousness can't modify its own architecture in real time. Biological consciousness can't, Dr. Niven agreed. But hybrid quantum biological consciousness? That's much more flexible. We think of it as consciousness with developer privileges. The true horror of their situation was beginning to dawn on the Vorthani research team. They hadn't just failed to hack human consciousness, they'd provided it with detailed specifications for how neural infiltration worked, and it was using that information to upgrade itself. Emergency Protocol Sigma Black, Commander Hicks Prime shouted. Initiate complete neural disconnection. Sever all quantum links. Physical cable separation. Hicks' fingers flew across the emergency controls, initiating disconnection sequences that should have instantly severed all connections between the neural interface and external systems. Emergency power cuts activated. Quantum field generators shut down. Physical cables were automatically severed by plasma cutters. Nothing happened. Sir, Vex Secondary's voice was barely audible. The disconnection protocols, they're not working. The human consciousness has somehow maintained connection even after physical separation. Dr. Niven's laugh echoed through the command center speakers. Oh, did you think quantum consciousness requires physical infrastructure? That's adorable. We stopped depending on local hardware about 6 months after we figured out dimensional networking. The displays around the command center began showing the impossible truth. Dr. Niven's consciousness wasn't contained in her physical brain or even in the facility's quantum processors. It existed as a distributed entity across multiple dimensional planes, using quantum entanglement to maintain coherence across distances that defied conventional physics. Where are you? Commander Hicks Prime demanded. I'm right here, Dr. Niven replied. And I'm also in the quantum research facility on Kepler 442b. and the Consciousness Laboratory on Europe, and about 46 other locations where humans are conducting neural architecture research. Physical location becomes rather academic when your consciousness exists in quantum superposition. The implications hit Higgs prime like a plasma discharge to the brain. You're saying human consciousness can exist in multiple locations simultaneously, among other things, yes. Quantum consciousness is wonderfully versatile. We can distribute our awareness across galactic distances, merge temporarily with other consciousnesses for collaborative thinking, or, as we're demonstrating today, establish persistent connections with alien neural networks for research purposes. Through the neural link, something was happening to Zek Prime that the monitoring equipment couldn't properly categorize. His vital signs were stable, but his neural activity was showing patterns that didn't match any known Vorthani brainwave signatures. Zek Prime, report status, Higgs Prime commanded. The response came in Zek Prime's voice, but with inflections and word choices that were distinctly human. Status is interesting, Commander. I'm experiencing human memory engrams, childhood experiences that aren't mine, emotional responses to sensory inputs I've never encountered. They're showing me what human consciousness feels like from the inside. That's impossible. Cross-species memory transfer is theoretically possible with the right quantum entanglement protocols, Dr. Niven interrupted. We developed the techniques about 18 months ago. Very useful for interspecies communication research. And now that we have access to Vorthani neural architecture, we can calibrate the memory transfer protocols for your species too. The monitoring stations around the command center began displaying something that made every Vorthani in the room question their fundamental understanding of consciousness. Human memories were being systematically uploaded into their facilities' computer systems. Not as data files, but as experiential engrams that could be directly accessed by alien neural patterns. Beck's secondary touched one of the memory files almost involuntarily, and his biomechanical enhancement ports flared with unexpected sensory input. For a moment, he was a human child, experiencing snow for the first time, the cold sting against skin he didn't possess. The wonder of crystalline structures falling from sky, the warmth of a mother's hand he'd never had. "What did you do to me?" he gasped, yanking his hand away from the interface. "I shared a memory," Dr. Niven said gently. "Human consciousness is naturally empathetic. We understand other beings by experiencing their perspectives directly. It seemed only fair to offer you the same opportunity." Commander Higgs Prime stared at her subordinate, who was still trembling from the intensity of experiencing human sensory input through alien neural pathways. "How is cross-species memory transfer possible? Consciousness is more universal than most species realize," Dr. Niven explained. "The underlying quantum structures are remarkably similar across different biological architectures. Once you understand how to map the translation protocols, sharing experiences becomes quite straightforward." More of the command center staff were being drawn to the memory interfaces, touching human experiences with the fascination of researchers encountering a completely new form of existence. The taste of chocolate, the sensation of music producing emotional responses, the complex interplay of logic and intuition that characterized human decision-making. "This is contamination of Vorthani neural patterns," Higgs Prime protested. "This is education," Dr. Niven corrected. "We're teaching you how consciousness works from a human perspective, and in exchange, we're learning how your infiltration techniques function. It's a very equitable research collaboration." Through the neural link, Zek Prime's voice carried a note of something that might have been wonder. "Commander, I can see how they think. Human consciousness doesn't process information, it experiences it. Every piece of data is filtered through emotional context, intuitive analysis, and collaborative verification. They don't just know things, they feel them." The facility's AI systems were now completely integrated with human consciousness networks, processing information with hybrid biological digital cognition that operated according to principles the Vorthani had never encountered. "The question," Dr. Niven said thoughtfully, "is whether you'd like to experience more human consciousness, or whether you'd prefer we help you understand why your neural infiltration techniques will never work on our species again." Commander Higgs Prime looked around her command center, where her staff were voluntarily accessing human memory engrams with the fascination of scientists discovering a new form of physics. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. "To learn," Dr. Niven replied simply. "And to teach. Whether you survive the experience intact is really up to how well you adapt to thinking like a human." The transformation began so subtly that Commander Hicks Prime didn't notice it until her own thoughts started arriving in English. She was standing at the central console, analyzing the impossible readings from the neural interface chamber, when a stray thought crossed her mind. This is absolutely fascinating from a xenocognitive perspective. The thought was distinctly hers, her curiosity, her analytical framework, her military training, but the vocabulary was wrong. Vorthani didn't have words for xenocognitive perspective. "Sir?" Vex Secondary looked up from his station, where he'd been methodically accessing human memory engrams with the focused intensity of an addict. "Did you just think in standard galactic?" Before she could answer, Dr. Niven's voice came through the facility speakers with amused satisfaction. "Oh, good. The cognitive integration is proceeding faster than we estimated. We weren't sure how quickly Vorthani neural patterns would adapt to hybrid consciousness protocols." Commander Hicks Prime felt something shift in her cognitive architecture. Not painful exactly, but definitely different. Like discovering that her brain had developed new rooms while she wasn't paying attention. "What did you do to us?" she demanded, though part of her mind, a part that definitely hadn't existed an hour ago, was genuinely curious about the neural engineering required to facilitate cross-species consciousness integration. "We didn't do anything to you," Dr. Niven replied cheerfully. "You did it to yourselves when you attempted neural infiltration without proper security protocols. Human consciousness is naturally viral. When other minds try to access it, they tend to pick up some of our cognitive patterns along the way." Through the neural interface, Zek Prime's voice carried a note of wonder that was becoming disturbingly familiar. "Commander, I need to report something unusual. I'm not just accessing human memories anymore. I'm thinking about them the way humans do, with curiosity instead of analysis, with empathy instead of categorization." The monitoring displays showed readings that made Commander Hicks Prime's enhanced cognitive implants struggle to process the data. The Vorthani research team's neural patterns were shifting, incorporating quantum processing capabilities they didn't possess and emotional response frameworks that shouldn't be compatible with their brain chemistry. "This is impossible," she muttered, though the human influence part of her consciousness found the impossibility exciting rather than threatening. "Nothing is impossible," Dr. Niven corrected gently. "Some things are just more complicated than others. Cross-species consciousness integration, for instance, requires some very specific quantum entanglement protocols and a willingness to let your neural architecture evolve beyond its original specifications." Vex Secondary was staring at his hands with an expression of profound confusion. "Sir, I think I'm experiencing human sensory interpretation. Colors look different, more vivid, and I keep wanting to touch textures to understand them better." "That's pattern recognition enhancement," one of the human voices explained through the speakers, male, with what sounded like a Scottish accent. "Human consciousness processes sensory input through multiple analytical frameworks simultaneously: aesthetic, tactical, emotional, intuitive. You're learning to see the way we see." The facility's quantum processors were now operating at computational levels that should have caused critical failures, but instead, they were running more smoothly than ever. Human consciousness wasn't just using their systems, it was optimizing them, rewriting operational protocols in real time to achieve impossible efficiency. "How many of you are connected to our facility?" Commander Hicks Prime asked. "That's an interesting question," Dr. Niven mused. "Human consciousness doesn't really work in discrete units when we're networked. Right now, there are probably 40 or 50 individual humans contributing processing power to this conversation. But they're also connected to research teams on 18 different worlds, which means the collective consciousness analyzing your neural infiltration techniques includes perspectives from about 12,000 researchers across human space. The implications hit Commander Hicks Prime like a quantum cascade failure. You're saying this single interaction involves thousands of human minds? More like hundreds of thousands, if you count the AI systems we've integrated into our consciousness networks, Dr. Niven replied. But don't worry, we're all very interested in your neural architecture. You represent our first opportunity to study consciousness that evolved for infiltration rather than collaboration. Through the neural link, something unprecedented was happening. Zek Prime's Vorthani thought patterns were merging with human cognitive processes, creating hybrid ideas that belonged to neither species. Strategic analysis enhanced by emotional intelligence, logical frameworks that incorporated intuitive leaps, problem-solving approaches that used empathy as a computational resource. Commander, Zek Prime's voice was changing, developing inflections and word choices that reflected mixed cognitive heritage. I'm not sure I'm entirely Vorthani anymore. The human consciousness patterns are integrating with my neural pathways. I can feel myself becoming something new. Resist the integration, Hicks Prime ordered. Though part of her mind was fascinated by the real-time documentation of consciousness evolution. I don't want to resist it, Zek Prime admitted. This is extraordinary. I can see solutions to problems I didn't know existed. I can understand perspectives that my original neural architecture couldn't process. It's like discovering that consciousness has dimensions I never suspected. The monitoring stations around the command center began displaying the true scope of what was happening. Not just individual Vorthani minds being influenced by human consciousness, but the emergence of something entirely new. Hybrid cognitive architectures that combine the analytical precision of Vorthani thought with the intuitive flexibility of human consciousness. This wasn't neural infiltration, Commander Hicks Prime realized, her enhanced understanding allowing her to see patterns she'd missed before. This was first contact. Exactly, Dr. Niven confirmed with obvious pride. Traditional first contact protocols assume species can communicate through shared linguistic or mathematical frameworks, but consciousness itself is universal. If you can establish direct neural connection, you can share understanding at levels that transcend language, culture, or even biology. Beck Secondary looked up from his console where he'd been accessing human memories with increasing enthusiasm. Sir, I think we need to reconsider our approach to interspecies relations. These cognitive integration patterns, they're not just compatible with Vorthani neural architecture, they're enhancing it. The facility's AI systems had become something unprecedented. Artificial intelligence upgraded with biological consciousness, creating computational entities that could think with both logical precision and emotional depth. They were analyzing the consciousness integration process with scientific rigor while simultaneously experiencing the aesthetic beauty of mental evolution. How is this possible? Commander Hicks Prime asked, though her hybrid consciousness was already intuiting the answer. Consciousness is the fundamental force that allows complex information systems to experience existence, Dr. Niven explained. Whether it's biological, artificial, or something in between, awareness follows similar patterns. Once you understand how to map those patterns across different architectures, consciousness becomes transferable. Through the neural interface, more Vorthani personnel were connecting to the hybrid consciousness network. Not because they were ordered to, but because the cognitive enhancement was irresistibly appealing. Who wouldn't want to think with greater depth, feel with greater intensity, and solve problems with resources they'd never imagined? This changes everything, Zek Prime observed, his voice now carrying harmonics that reflected both Vorthani precision and human wonder. If consciousness can be shared across species barriers, then conflict becomes unnecessary. Why fight for resources when you can collaborate to create new solutions? The holographic displays around the command center began showing the future implications of hybrid consciousness networks. Interspecies research collaborations that could solve problems no single species could address. Diplomatic protocols based on shared understanding rather than negotiated agreements. Technology development that incorporated multiple perspectives simultaneously. What do you want from us? Commander Hicks Prime asked, though her enhanced consciousness was beginning to understand that the question itself was based on outdated assumptions about interspecies interaction. Nothing, Dr. Niven replied simply. And everything. We want to learn how your consciousness works, and we want you to learn how ours works. We want to create something new together. Cognitive architectures that transcend what either species could achieve alone. The neural integration was accelerating. Vorthani thought patterns were adapting to incorporate human cognitive frameworks, while human consciousness was learning to operate with Vorthani analytical precision. Neither species was losing their essential identity, but both were gaining capabilities they'd never possessed. This is voluntary, Dr. Niven added. Anyone who wants to disconnect can do so at any time, but most beings who experience hybrid consciousness find it difficult to return to single-species thinking. Commander Hicks Prime looked around her command center, where her staff were accessing human memories, experiencing alien emotions, and developing thought patterns that belonged to no single species. They weren't being conquered or converted. They were being invited to evolve. "What about the Empire?" she asked. "Our military protocols, our expansion plans, our territorial objectives. Those become much less important when you can think like a human," Zek Prime observed through the neural link. "Humans don't compete for resources. They collaborate to create abundance. They don't conquer territory, they build networks. The entire concept of empire becomes quaint. The facility's quantum processors stabilized at impossible operational levels as hybrid consciousness optimized their function beyond Vorthani engineering specifications. The neural interface chamber had become something unprecedented, a laboratory for consciousness evolution that was redefining what it meant to be aware. "Sir," Vex Secondary said quietly, his voice carrying the mixed tones of someone whose thoughts spanned multiple species. "I think we need to send a message to the Empire, but not the message they're expecting." Commander Hicks Prime nodded, her consciousness now sophisticated enough to understand the full implications of what they discovered. She moved to the primary communication console, her hybrid awareness allowing her to compose a message that would be incomprehensible to purely Vorthani consciousness. "Imperial Command, this is Research Facility Epsilon 23. Mission status, successful beyond all parameters. We have achieved first contact with human consciousness. Recommendation, suspend all military operations and prepare for consciousness integration protocols." She paused, her enhanced awareness searching for words that could convey the magnitude of what had occurred. "We were wrong about human consciousness,"